Glad everybody's here. Good to see you. No, I sat with a bunch of Methodist ministers the other day. I did not bring up the dumpster fire in the parking lot. Didn't seem appropriate because so many of the things they're going through these days with they're having their own dumpster fire. So I thought we'll have a conversation on another day. All right. So it's good to have everybody out. Everybody's all the cold air's got everybody, juiced and jazzed, except for Ashlyn. I know, but it's okay. I did think about you the other day when I was at the divinity school when the chapel. This chapel wasn't built when we were there. It's built after. It's a beautiful and it's such a high worship space. They even have a pipe organ in there, and it's up on a loft, which really is the kind of the, woohoo, we're really up there when you do that. And so we're sitting there, and I was late for worship. That's a whole different discussion. But at the end, they were doing some music, and it was, and somebody walked up there and started playing the drums. I just had to start laughing because it's such a place of high worship, and they're bringing in this new element, and it was just hilarious to watch it play out. But I thought about you with the drummer. It's like, yeah, it's her fave. There it is. And they were using it for a classic traditional hymn, and it was just really, I just sat there and laughed. I'm sorry. But I just had to chuckle because it was not good. Okay. We'll talk about that in the sermon a little bit, though. Okay. All right. So here we are in the middle in Mark, chapter 10. And to keep everything in context, it was because I think this is a really important part. That this is kind of like where a lot of the action is. Mark is the shortest gospel, and he likes to keep moving. He likes to keep the action going. 58 times in the Gospel of Mark, he uses the word immediately. And so he's got everything rolling. So chapter 9, Jesus goes up to the mountain of transfiguration. From that moment on, he's facing Jerusalem. We're going to Jerusalem. We're going to die. And we're going to change the direction of everything. So he's focused on that. And here's where he starts telling in chapter 9, chapter 8, chapter 9 is where he starts telling the disciples, hey, the Son of Man's coming. The Son of Man has come he's going to give himself away. And guess what? Y'all are his disciples. Asking the same thing. So it goes through the different aspects there. We dealt with the rich young ruler last week. And so now we move into this next part of chapter 10. And keep this in mind too. Chapter 11 starts Holy Week. So this is how close we are to the end. Chapter 11, think of it again. I always kind of talk about this, but it's the thing to keep in everybody's head. In Mark's gospel, when you get to chapter 11, that's the last week of his life. A third of the gospel is based on the last week of Jesus' life. That should tell us that's really, 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 really important to Mark. A third of his gospel is based on that last episode. But now this part is getting him there. So let's see. Mark chapter 10, what is it? 35 through 45. Here we go. Wow. I don't know how you can shrink print in the Bible, but mine's getting smaller as we go. I have to stand back here, see it better. Okay. This is a pretty familiar story, and we'll talk about it, how it comes from the difference between Matthew's gospel and Mark's. Let's do it. Mark 10, 35 through 45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him, Jesus, and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What is it you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant us to sit, one on your right hand and one on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they replied, We are able. And then Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it's not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whosoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Familiar? Okay, very. Okay, wow, that's a comment. Now, just real quick, you don't have to turn. Matthew's gospel, Matthew's version of this is in 20, verse 20. There you go. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. And he said to her, What do you want? And she said to him, Declare that these 2 sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom. And then the rest of it plays out pretty much the same. So Mark deals with it. In Mark, as I've always said, I contend most people do, that Mark's was the first gospel, not Matthew, but Mark was the first, and Matthew and Luke came off of him, and then John, much later, does his own thing. So Mark's gospel has the sons doing it themselves. Matthew has mom, good old mom, doing it for him. Okay, helicopter parent here. Yeah, the original helicopter parent. Yeah. Current day would have probably had, a contract ready to sign or something, but and a video camera there to show the whole event. But I just think that's funny that Matthew takes it out of their hands and gives it to someone else to take care of. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. But I think maybe it's a lessening of the brunt of the story on the brothers Zebedee, as opposed to Mark, which Mark is much rougher. As I've always told you, Mark just says stuff. He just writes it, and writes it in a rough and brutal sort of language to where you go, this guy has no couth about him. And see, Matthew, Matthew and Luke come back and polish him up some, and kind of take his language and kind of smooths it over a little bit, and because they've had a little more. They've had a few more years to think it through and go, oh, this was Mark wasn't thinking here. All right, he just, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, and so, That's funny. Yeah, in the words in rhetorical criticism, which was kind of the world I loved to be a part of when I was in those are the courses I took, rhetorical criticism. The harshest version is normally considered the most accurate, because who would go back and make it worse than it was? Yeah, we normally go back and kind of, when First and Second Kings, First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles. Chronicles retells the story of First, Second Samuel about David, leaving out one story in particular. Bathsheba doesn't make it into Chronicles. Why? Years later, you don't want to talk about in Chronicles. In Chronicles, David is seen as is called the man after God's own heart. And if you're going to do that, you got to kind of leave that story out. The later we get from something, we kind of like to polish it up a little bit. So, okay. So what do we hear? Here with. Okay. They. Yeah. So, yeah. So James and John. Again. Mark's gospel, the disciples are clumsy. Yep, they're dense. But let's be very, very careful about the description and the adjectives we use about them, because the point is, we be them. Uh-huh.
That they're going to follow all the way through.
Yeah.
The fact that he's telling them it's not up to him who's on the right or the left.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't think they're going, oh, well, I'm out of here.
Well,
maybe he already knows.
well, he does.
He already knows that there's going to be people on the cross next to him.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Isn't it when you look at when he talks about right and left, we do know a little bit. This is the problem with James and John. He says, and he tells him, he says, you think you can do this? Oh, yeah. Just like Peter, they're called the sons of thunder in Matthew, right? Sons of thunder. So you get the impression they the life of the party, okay? They're fishermen. They're not. These aren't accountants we're talking about here. These guys are the party. Can you handle this? Yeah, we can do this.
Until they find out how the party's going to end.
Which, think about it. We're the readers. We're watching over this story. We've read the ending. We know how this story goes. So we read this story very different from where they're standing. Jesus is saying to them, "Hey, can you handle this? You sure?" And they're like, "Yeah." And we're all going, "Ooh." Be careful what you ask for. It does display the grand misunderstanding of what they think the kingdom is. And when I say they, I mean us. And we hear that a lot in public theology today because of the grandstanding of who Christians think we are in this country, that it was founded on Christian. I'd go back and read some history if I were you. First. Number two. But nonetheless, these two characters have this notion of what they think is coming. And Jesus is telling them, not exactly, but you're going to get to go through it just like I did.
Do you think that they really believed that he was going to come out? Because it seems like silly to be bringing something up about whose side they're going to be on if they really believe that Christ is in heaven.
Right. Total misunderstanding of what was coming. Also, in all fairness to them, absolutely. But right. And so, and the notion too is that the Son of Man is a concept taken from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, which didn't necessarily mean a person. It was a government, it was an institution, it was a warrior, it was somebody, something, in some way, shape, or form that takes them back to the glory days of when David was king and things were really good. And so, in fairness, they're playing along with Son of Man. Jesus is the one who is taking the Son of Man, or that position, that place, and saying, yeah, I know that's what the understanding has been, but that's not the way this is going to play out. So he's flipping the understanding of what they had always known. You know, and that is a hard concept about faith, right? Because we have ways of which we have a theological framework. We all do. And how we understand the world through that framework. And then what happens to us when that theological framework gets fractured or exploded? Okay? Sometimes we can dumb that, yeah, because we go, this is right, because this is what I believe. My grandmother taught me this. I learned this in Sunday school, by God. This ain't wrong.
But then we have to open up to,
And then there's some options. Some people, and this is ultimately what the story of Job is. I know when I grew up being told the story of Job is what happened. What happens when the righteous suffer, and that's not what that story is about at all. It's because we don't. The notion is what happens when your theological framework gets crushed. Where do you go from there?
You know, Pastor,
Yeah.
when I read this morning, again,
Uh-huh.
when you look at disciples, I see a teamwork.
Uh-huh.
I see some teamwork.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Okay.
when James and John, the disciples were much displeased.
Yes, they
But you
were.
know what? It
Yeah.
went from this level of tension to all
Yeah.
of a sudden,
Yeah.
Jesus is teaching them,
Yeah.
and it's like the disciples are willing to, they're listening to
Yeah.
him, and James and John,
Yeah.
you see some dynamics come into play here.
Yeah.
That's a leadership style
Yeah.
you're just not used to seeing.
Yep, it is a different leadership style. And it's interesting, too, that the rest get mad when they find out what the two did, because they're probably going, geez, I should have thought of that first. that's the way they're mad. They're like, how can you do this? And what's Jesus do? He grabs them all. Okay, everybody, let's gather around one more time. Hey, everybody, if you want to be great in this kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God, it's about service and servant leadership.
And that brings me to another
Yes.
one.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, Pastor, you know, there's a book that I first Driven Life by Reverend Rick Warren. I found that to be very useful teaching.
Yep.
But the thing about it, a couple of chapters that go on there, the 5 chapters.
Uh-huh.
One's worshiping God, the other one's preparing as a disciple.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you take the emphasis on worshiping God
Uh-huh.
and preparing yourself to be a Christian,
Uh-huh.
but then you look, but the key here is ministering to others. It's
Right.
like, hey, the important thing is not, it's what you're doing. What you're doing in the cafeteria, what you're doing in the Sunday school class. So to be
Right.
chief
Yeah.
of all, you gotta get servant.
Of all. Right. And remember the Greek word, servant, slave, same word. There's no difference. It's just how we interpret it. Doulos means both of those. It's just how it gets, and I think you find it gets mixed in this passage. We translate it into English both ways here. Again, I find that fascinating. Go ahead, sorry.
But I just, James stressed works. And here it seems Jesus just hit on works as being chief.
Right. Yeah. As the aspect of discipleship, that he's saying, if you want to be great, if you want to be a leader, you have to be servant.
Has anybody seen the episode of The Chosen for this particular?
No.
It's
No.
incredible
Is
because Jesus goes to his mom,
Uh-huh.
and his mom is washing his hair,
Uh-huh.
relaxing, and he is so
Uh-huh.
frustrated with all the disciples. He's like,
Yeah.
Mom, they just don't
Yeah.
get it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And
Well, I'm.
it's a great,
Yeah.
great scene.
And it is, that show does a really, I think they've done a pretty good job of kind of showing all different angles of these stories. I do like some of that, the ones I've seen, let me say it that way. So here's Jesus, and it's our turn now, because we have gotten to the 20-minute moment, which like we always do, is now we flip this story and we go, okay, this is what the disciples were going through. Now, what does this story mean for us in this day and age?
Well, I have a question first.
Sure.
The cup.
The cup. Oh, yeah, the cup of which you drink.
This cup where you prayed that the Lord said, take the cup away from me?
It's in the same image, yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this situation is
Yeah.
the cup servitude. Like, my cup is to serve, and so that should be your cup too.
Well, let me get back to this so we get it totally right here. Sorry. Somebody's marked up my Bible. They replied, then Jesus said, in the cup that I drink, you will drink. Actually, this is the same. It's the notion that when he's saying, take this cup from me, the cup of crucifixion, because the disciples do, at least in church history or church folklore, however you use that, they all find their way to crucifixion or some kind of martyrdom. Yeah, thank you. Lost that word. So, there. So, for us, what does this passage mean for us as individuals, family, congregation? Service, okay?
We shouldn't be asking you if we can sit on your left side.
Yeah, don't put me in the place of Jesus. I don't know. That's a little, I'm not comfortable now.
Well, somebody said earlier, the first will be last and the last will be key. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's as simple as that.
And I have to say that is this not the struggle still of what it means to be a part of the kingdom of God when we function in a world? It's the neighbor, Christ in culture, Christ above culture, Christ against culture. And this is kind of the Christ against culture that neighbor kind of saw Jesus or Christ in different walks and aspects of life. And this is kind of the Christ against culture, right? Our culture tells us that leaders, we got to be first, and if you ain't first, you're last. And but also that even in the church, that leadership means some sense of, that we tend to, Never forget sitting in a pastor at Wake Forest Divinity School. James Forbes was the pastor of Riverside Church. It wasn't Presbyterian. Riverside Church, New York. It's right. It's up on the upper side, and it's amazing building, incredible place. And at the time you'd walk in and the people, they had guards everywhere and TV cameras so you can see everything, and you walk in the sanctuary. It was amazing. Not asking for one, but the pastor had a driver. You know? And the pastor that follows Forbes, this just lets you know what it's like. He got in trouble with the congregation because he asked for a driver for his wife. I mean, you see. So we're in this group, and Forbes is going on, and he was an amazing man, great preacher, everything. But it was just this one stunning moment. He was talking about equity, and they're going through all of this stuff with the staff and you know, social justice. And somebody went, this guy raised his hand and said, so with this conversation you're having in your church at Riverside, does that mean like the custodial staff is going to be paid somewhat in comparison to you? And it was an amazing answer that he gave. I can't tell you what it was because it just rambled and went all over the place, and basically was like, yeah, I'm not going to deal with that. You know? So, he got me at the driver, I got to tell you. I was like, how would I have a driver? You know? How would that work? How would a driver work as a pastor?
But that's a normal thing if you are, if you're wealthy in New York,
Right,
you have drivers. You don't own, cars or.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not one of those things, right?
Yeah, that, I don't,
We
yeah.
have drivers for many of our
Yeah.
high-powered
Yeah.
executives, and we have drivers for our high-powered traders, and we have drivers that take people home that have been there for 14 hours.
Yeah.
That's a normal New York thing. Now, you ask for a driver in Charlotte, your head spins around.
Yeah, that's
In
right.
New York.
Yeah. We see, yeah.
Now,
And
how
so-
many days would you want to drive?
I don't want to drive her. I don't want to drive her. I don't want to drive
There
her.
would be critiques, somebody said,
It's just, I don't want to drive her.
It's funny that he asked this during budget.
I know, it's just, I don't want a driver. I'm just saying that you see that the understanding of what it means to be a leader, even in the church, is somewhat comparative to leadership in banking, business, power. And that when the church and when all of us are in this struggle for power, we might be misunderstanding what the gospel is calling us to. I thought we were about to do an altar call there. No, we're not doing that either. But no, we don't have an altar. We don't. But so, this notion that what it means to be in servant leadership as opposed to what can I get out of this is really where the rubber meets the road in the church. And let's be honest, even small things of power. The flower calendar in a previous church was power, and I would go, this is not that big of a deal to me. I mean, I know it was. It was totally the wrong answer. It was totally the wrong answer because I'm allergic. I don't, flowers just not my thing. It's cool, but you know what? You see what I'm saying? That we can turn even the smallest, what we think smallest things, into huge things of power. In the church, where no, this is mine. This is mine. And I don't want to give it up. And Jesus is saying, if this is where we're going, this is the way we have to be.
Yeah, but we've got two different definitions of leader.
Yeah, right.
One is actually leading,
Yeah.
out front,
Yeah.
leading, follow me,
Yeah.
going this way.
Yeah.
He's leading,
Yeah.
I'm going to the
Yeah.
grave, you're following.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
It's,
other one is, y'all go out and do this.
yeah. Well, that's ultimately too. where Jesus is leading, we have to think, okay, let's think about that. Again, this week, having the sitting there with this group of people in divinity school, we were. I did know actually 2 people. I knew 2 people out of the whole bunch. But we were talking about when Dr. Willie Jennings was there, and he had just started, and he was doing CM10, and they don't even do that anymore. But we had that class, and he said, I was telling the story because I remember it so well because it was one of my first days there. He said, your example of leadership is Jesus as a pastor. Jesus. My hand went up. I said, Mr. Dr. Jennings, Jesus died on a cross. And he said, yeah, even if you have to die on the cross, he's your... I was like, oh, this is not near as fun as I thought it was going to be.
You had to change the flower.
She held on to that flower calendar till she died. She wasn't giving it up. And the question for us today is small things, big things. How is it that we follow Jesus and drink from that cup that he's drinking from? And he's called us to something so, so, so much deeper and different than what we're so used to. And that's why I get really, really nervous when people start mixing faith or Christianity and politics, because it seems like we're after some power here. And I'm not talking about one particular side or the other. I'm talking about every single one of them, because they all tend to do that. And something we have to be really, 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 really careful of in our own lives and as a congregation, and how we function in the politics of congregation too, about what it means to be leaders and how we carry that out in the world. I'm 2 minutes over, sorry. Let's pray. Gracious God, we give thanks for scriptures that do challenge us to be more like Christ. Challenge us to be servant leaders, that we understand that we're giving ourselves away, and that's what it means to be great in your kingdom. May we be faithful. It's in your name we pray.